Episode 20. The Weight of Centuries. Elena Brightwater entered the council chamber for the fourth time in as many days, and this time she understood the game being played. The chamber was fuller than it had been during the previous sessions. Word had spread through the palace that Magister Greymark was making another attempt, and magisters who had remained neutral before now filled the tiered seats. Some came to witness the spectacle. Others came because they'd finally chosen a side. Elena counted heads as she walked to her designated position near the front. Greymark had gained support. She could see it in the cluster of magisters who sat near him, their expressions carefully neutral but their positioning deliberate. The memorial chamber proposal had done its work, offering a compromise that felt reasonable to those who wanted the problem solved without appearing callous. Archmage Verena sat in her usual place, pale but upright, her eyes meeting Elena's with a slight nod. High Inquisitor Mordain stood against the back wall, arms crossed, his presence a reminder that this was not merely a political debate, but a question of how the kingdom would remember its salvation. King Aldrich entered last, and the chamber fell silent. The king looked older than he had 4 days ago. The weight of what had happened in the Grand Hall, the catastrophic failure of conventional magic, the necessity of forbidden practices he had spent his reign opposing, the sight of a young mage transforming into something barely human to save them all, had carved new lines into his face. He took his seat and gestured for the session to begin. Magister Greymark stood immediately. "Your Majesty, honored magisters, I thank you for reconvening so quickly. The matter of the warden's placement remains urgent, as reconstruction efforts are stalled by the necessity of working around the convergence point." Elena noted the phrasing. Not Cassian Netherbane, or even the mage, just the warden, reducing him to a title, a function, a problem to be solved. "I have consulted with Master Architect Davrin," Greymark continued, pulling a rolled parchment from his robes. "He has designed a memorial chamber directly beneath the Grand Hall, accessible by a central staircase that would make the warden's sacrifice visible and honored while allowing reconstruction to proceed unimpeded. The chamber would be magnificent. Vaulted ceilings, eternal flames, inscriptions detailing the heroism of all 74 souls, a place of pilgrimage rather than an obstacle to daily governance." He unrolled the parchment, revealing an architectural rendering. Elena had to admit it was beautiful. The chamber Davrin had designed looked like a cathedral, with Cassian's frozen form positioned at the center beneath a dome that would let natural light filter down from the rebuilt Grand Hall above. "The warden would not be hidden," Greymark said, his voice reasonable and measured. "He would be enshrined, protected, honored in a space designed specifically for remembrance, rather than left standing in a construction zone where his dignity is compromised by scaffolding and stone dust." Several magisters nodded. Elena felt the chamber's mood shifting. The proposal was clever. It acknowledged her arguments about visibility and truth while offering practical solutions to legitimate concerns. "May I see the plans?" Elena asked. Greymark looked surprised, but handed her the parchment. Elena studied it carefully, noting the details Davrin had included. The staircase was wide and central, impossible to miss. The chamber itself was large enough for gatherings, with space for scholars to work and pilgrims to pay respects. Inscriptions along the walls would tell the story of the ceiling in detail. It was almost perfect. Almost. "How deep?" Elena asked. Greymark frowned. "I'm sorry? How deep beneath the Grand Hall?" Elena traced her finger along the architectural cross-section. "This shows approximately 40 feet of earth and stone between the chamber floor and the convergence point where the working occurred. How deep below the Grand Hall's floor level is the chamber's ceiling?" 20 feet, Greymark said. "A reasonable depth for structural integrity while maintaining. 20 feet of stone between the memorial and the place where people conduct daily business," Elena interrupted. She looked up at the assembled magisters. 20 feet of separation between the truth of what happened and the comfortable fiction we tell ourselves. "That's not fair," Greymark protested. "The chamber would be beautiful, accessible, specifically designed for making us feel better about what we asked him to do," Elena said. She set the parchment down carefully. "This is magnificent work, truly. Master Davrin has designed something that would honor Cassian's sacrifice while allowing us to rebuild our seat of power above him. We could hold court, conduct ceremonies, celebrate victories, all while the price of those victories stands frozen in a beautiful room beneath our feet, where we can visit when we feel guilty enough to remember. The chamber stirred. Several magisters looked uncomfortable. The keeper speaks as if visibility is the only measure of honor. Magister Thalia said from her seat. She was one of the magisters Elena had marked as newly allied with Greymark. But surely protection matters as well. The Grand Hall will be a construction site for months. Workers, debris, magical testing of the rebuilt wards. Is that truly more dignified than a dedicated space? It's more honest, Elena said. She picked up her notebook, the one containing Cassian's memories, the fragments of his identity she was fighting to preserve. I've been reading to him, his memories, his life, the reasons he chose to sacrifice himself, and one thing becomes clear the more I learn about who he was. Cassian Netherbane did not do this so we could build a beautiful room to contain our guilt. She opened the notebook to a marked page. This is from his time at the academy. He wrote about a lecture on magical ethics, where the instructor discussed the founding mages who performed the original sealing. The instructor called them heroes, martyrs, examples of the highest ideals of magical service. And Cassian wrote, "But did anyone ask them what they wanted? Or did we just decide their sacrifice was beautiful because it made our survival possible?" Elena closed the notebook. He understood, even then, that we would try to turn what happened into a story we could live with, a narrative of noble sacrifice instead of desperate necessity. Heroes choosing glory instead of a young mage burning away his humanity because no one else could stop what was coming. The chamber was silent. The Grand Hall is uncomfortable, Elena continued. It forces everyone who enters to see what preservation actually costs. It makes magisters conducting research walk past the frozen form of someone who did what they could not. It reminds the council every time they meet that their conventional magic failed, and a common-born mage using forbidden practices succeeded. That discomfort is not a flaw in his placement. It is the point. The keeper argues for permanent inconvenience as a form of truth, Greymark said, his voice hardening slightly. But governance requires functionality. The Grand Hall is the kingdom's ceremonial and administrative heart. We cannot leave it in its current state indefinitely. Then rebuild around him, Elena said. Design the new Grand Hall to incorporate his presence rather than hide it. Make the convergence point where he stands part of the architecture itself. Let every ceremony, every council session, every moment of governance happen in sight of what it cost to preserve this kingdom. That would make him the center of everything, Magister Thalia objected. The focus of every gathering, the first thing visitors see. Yes, Elena said simply, it would. King Aldrich had been silent throughout the debate, his expression unreadable. Now he stirred, leaning forward slightly in his throne. High Inquisitor, he said, his voice cutting through the chamber's murmur. You have been quiet. What is your assessment? Mordain pushed away from the wall, his tall frame commanding attention as he moved to address the king directly. Your Majesty, I have spent 30 years enforcing laws against forbidden magic, Mordain said. I have hunted mages who claimed necessity justified their practices. I have stood witness to executions of those who insisted they had no choice. And in every case, I believed the law was clear and my duty absolute. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled magisters. 4 days ago, I watched a young mage use anathema-class magic to accomplish what 200 of our best magisters could not. I watched him consume a crystallized soul, the darkest taboo in our practice, to gain the knowledge needed to channel the power of 73 ancient mages. I watched him transform into something barely human to save this kingdom from annihilation. And then I watched this council debate whether his sacrifice should be visible or hidden. Mordain's voice hardened. The keeper is correct. Moving him to a memorial chamber, no matter how beautiful, serves only one purpose, allowing us to forget what actually happened, to transform desperate necessity into comfortable heroism, to hide the truth that our conventional magic failed and forbidden practices succeeded. But surely, Magister Thalia began, there is middle ground between. There is no middle ground, Mordain interrupted. Either we acknowledge what happened or we don't. Either we preserve the uncomfortable truth or we don't. The memorial chamber is an attempt to have it both ways, to claim we're honoring his sacrifice while ensuring that honor doesn't inconvenience our daily lives. He turned to face Elena. The Keeper understands something many of us are still learning, that bearing witness means more than remembering. It means refusing to let the truth become comfortable. It means standing guard not just over a frozen mage, but over the reality of what his sacrifice represents. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Mordain had spent decades hunting mages like Cassian, enforcing the very laws that had made the sealing necessary. His support now carried weight precisely because it cost him something to give it. King Aldrich was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, and the entire chamber rose with him. Master Architect Davrin will redesign the Grand Hall, the king said, his voice carrying absolute authority. The convergence point where Warden Netherbane stands will be incorporated into the new structure as its central feature. The reconstruction will flow around him, not above him. The space will be designed so that all who enter see him first and understand what his presence represents. Greymark's face flushed. Your Majesty, the practical difficulties will be solved by architects and builders, not political convenience, Aldrich said. His gaze swept across the chamber. This council has debated the warden's placement 3 times now. There will not be a 4th. His sacrifice will remain visible for the 3 centuries it endures, and we will learn to govern in sight of what that sacrifice means. The king's voice softened slightly. Magister Greymark, your concerns about dignity and protection are noted and appreciated. But the Keeper has convinced me that the greatest dignity we can offer is truth, and the greatest protection is remembrance. This matter is closed. Elena felt her knees weaken with relief, but she kept her expression steady as the king continued. The Keeper will work with Master Architect Davrin to ensure the reconstruction honors both the warden's sacrifice and the practical needs of governance. This council is adjourned. The magisters filed out slowly, some looking relieved, others frustrated. Greymark left without meeting Elena's eyes, his supporters following in his wake. Elena knew she had made enemies today, magisters, who would remember her opposition and find other ways to undermine what she was trying to preserve. But she had won. For now. Archmage Verena approached as the chamber emptied, moving carefully to accommodate her still healing injuries. Well fought, Verena said quietly. Though you should know that Greymark won't stop. He'll find other battles, other ways to reshape the narrative. I know, Elena said. Senior researcher Amara warned me this would be a long war. It will be, Verena agreed. But you've established something important today. You've shown the council that you won't compromise on the fundamental truth, even when offered beautiful alternatives. That reputation will serve you in the decades to come. The Archmage paused, then added, though you should also learn when to accept compromise. Not every battle needs to be fought to the last breath. Sometimes strategic retreat preserves strength for more important fights. How do I know which battles are which? Elena asked. Verena smiled faintly. That's the question every keeper has struggled with. Seraphina Thornweave's journals will help. She fought many of these same conflicts, but ultimately you'll have to trust your judgment about what matters most. High Inquisitor Mordain waited until the chamber was nearly empty before approaching. Thank you, Elena said. Your support was self-serving, Mordain interrupted, though his tone was not unkind. I spent 30 years enforcing laws I now question. Every magister I hunted, every execution I witnessed, I need to believe that some truth was preserved from all that rigidity, that the law I served, however imperfectly, at least maintained honest boundaries. He glanced toward where Cassian's frozen form waited in the grand hall beyond. If we hide what he did, if we transform his sacrifice into comfortable mythology, then what was the point of any of it? The laws, the hunts, the executions, all of it becomes meaningless if we can't even preserve the truth when it saves us. You're trying to make sense of your past, Elena said quietly. I'm trying to make it mean something, Mordain corrected. And the only way it means anything is if we're honest about what happened when the laws I enforced proved insufficient. He turned to leave, then paused. The king meant what he said about working with Master Davrin. The architect will need guidance about what matters most in the reconstruction. Make sure he understands that visibility isn't just about physical placement. It's about context, emphasis, the story the space itself tells. I will, Elena promised. She returned to the grand hall alone. Walking past workers who were beginning to clear debris from the edges of the space while leaving the convergence point untouched. Cassian stood frozen at the center, his form still dusted with stone fragments from the battle 4 days ago. Elena settled into her usual position and opened her notebook. You won, she said softly, knowing he couldn't hear, but speaking anyway. The council voted to keep you here. The king ordered the grand hall redesigned around you. You'll stand at the center of everything for the next 300 years, exactly as uncomfortable and necessary as you were in life. She traced the corruption patterns that marked his frozen form, looking for the symbol that meant, I hear you. I remember. But there was nothing new today, just the same dark veins that had been there since the ceiling. I met with Master Architect Davrin this morning, Elena continued, turning to a fresh page in her notebook. He's brilliant, actually, already thinking about how to make the space work functionally while preserving what matters. He suggested a circular design with your position at the center. The rebuilt throne dais raised slightly so the king faces you during council sessions. Symbolic, he said. Governance in sight of its cost. She wrote notes as she spoke, documenting the conversation for her own records and for the 74, in case they could still hear. Greymark will try again, Elena said. Verena warned me, and I can see it in how he looked at me when he left. He's not done fighting for his version of how this should be remembered, but I'm not done either. A sound made her look up. Mira stood at the grand hall's entrance, carrying a tray with food and tea. I thought you might be hungry, the young woman said, approaching carefully. You were in the council chamber for hours. Elena realized she'd forgotten to eat again. Thank you. Mira set the tray down and hesitated, looking at Cassian's frozen form. My brother came by earlier. He wanted me to tell you. He's been talking to the other people Warden Netherbane saved. From the southern market district, from the palace, from all over. They want to do something, to help somehow, but they don't know how. Tell them to remember, Elena said. Tell them to tell their children what really happened. Not the story the council wants told, but the truth. That a common-born mage using forbidden magic saved them when conventional practice failed. Mira nodded slowly. My brother said something similar. He said people keep trying to make it sound noble, like Warden Netherbane chose glory. But he saw what it cost. He saw the corruption, the transformation. He said it wasn't noble, it was necessary. Your brother understands, Elena said. That's exactly what needs to be remembered. After Mira left, Elena ate mechanically while reading from her notebook. Cassian's memories of the academy, his studies, his fears about using forbidden magic. The words were familiar now. She'd read them so many times, she could almost recite them from memory. But that was the point. If she forgot, if she let the details blur into comfortable mythology, then what was she preserving? The afternoon light shifted through the grand hall's broken ceiling, casting long shadows across the floor. Workers had begun marking areas for reconstruction, their chalk lines careful to avoid the convergence point. Elena watched them work, thinking about how the space would change over the coming months. The grand hall would be rebuilt, the kingdom would recover, life would continue as it always did, with people gradually forgetting how close they'd come to annihilation. But she would remember. For 300 years, if that's what it took, she would stand guard over the truth of what had happened here. Elena pressed her palm against Cassian's frozen hand, still cold, still unresponsive, and whispered, I won't let them forget, I promise. No answer came. But in the corruption patterns marking his transformed flesh, Elena thought she saw something shift, just the faintest flicker like a candle flame behind dark glass. Or perhaps it was only her imagination, desperate for any sign that some part of him remained aware. She settled back into her vigil, opened her notebook to a fresh page, and began documenting everything that had happened in the council session. Every argument, every response, every detail that might matter to whoever continued this work after her. Because this was only the beginning. the first battle in a war that would span centuries. And Elena Brightwater was learning how to fight.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.